In the early 70s, what was then the Welsh Office, this was obviously long before devolution, was looking to, I suppose, engage with disabled or disability organisations in Wales. And they approached the Council for Social Services, which is now known as Wales Council for Voluntary Action, to undertake an exercise to find out what disability organisations there were in Wales, and also whether there was a national organisation or whether there would be interest amongst disability groups in one being set up. There was quite an appetite amongst the groups that they spoke to for one to be set up, a kind of an umbrella body. So this was reported back to the Welsh Office, which then agreed and made funding available to set up what became known as Wales Council for the Disabled. The 80s then was very much about improving wider access to the built environment beyond your own home. So, access to town centres, to transport, to, there's quite a lot of building going on, new developments, ensuring housing was accessible. So DW was very much about pushing forward on those issues, setting up access groups around Wales where disabled people and others could work with local authorities and other bodies to kind of improve access in the locality. The 90s was about look at things like promoting disability equality training, working with disabled people to set up either disabled people's organisations or centres for independent living, and then also being involved in the Rights Now campaign, which was about campaigning for fully enforceable and a comprehensive civil rights legislation. In 1994, Wales Council for the Disabled voted in an AGM to change its name. A number of disabled activists particularly felt uncomfortable with the name Wales Council for the Disabled because it was very much gave the sense of the organisation being about doing things for the disabled rather than disabled people doing things for ourselves. And that was quite a key moment in terms of what the identity of the organisation was and what it represented to the wider public as well as to disabled people. Over the previous kind of 15 years, there'd been many attempts to get a disability discrimination bill through Parliament. Coalitions that had been seen in places like Manchester, Bristol, London kind of started to develop in Wales. I think most notably the Cardiff and Vale Coalition of Disabled People. And those groups very much got behind the Rights Now campaign and them sort of bringing Disability Wales in to be part of that, be part of lobbying MPs, supporting lobbies of Parliament, rallies at Trafalgar Square. I think there was a real sense of momentum that change was needed, and it was very much about disabled people driving that change. So I'd become Chief Executive in 2001. What I was keen to do as Chief Executive was to work with the board, members and staff to look at how Disability Wales itself could make that journey, that it could become the national disabled people's organisation. The motion was put to an extraordinary general meeting, an EGM, in 2003, that DW should formally adopt a social model of disability, that board membership should be 100% made up of people who identified as disabled people, and that to be a full voting member of DW, your group should have at least 51%, be 51%, you know, running controlled by disabled people. With the advent of devolution, you know, with the election of assembly members, you know, with the you know, government in Wales, there was greater opportunity to influence those policies that had been devolved to Wales. But we now had the opportunity to more directly influence policy, to directly engage with ministers and assembly members, as they were then called. We published a manifesto for independent living, and ahead of the 2011 assembly elections, and we managed to you know, influence the government to introduce what became the Framework for Action on Independent Living, which was the first cross-cutting approach to tackling barriers to independent living in Wales. It was underpinned by the social model of disability and the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, and that framework was finally launched in 2013. We had the opportunity to undertake research into barriers to independent living. DRILL was very much about disabled people being in control of the research area, with the academics acting, sharing their expertise, but not, you know, not controlling the research agenda. And I think that was important for us because it actually built the capacity of disabled people's organisations to develop research skills, to work co-productively with, you know, universities. And I think that work has really carried on, and you know, was very evident then in, for example, our involvement in the co-production of the Locked Out report, which was, you know, looking at the impact of COVID, you know, on disabled people, and other work with universities in Wales. Something else that we'd long lobbied for was for an access to elected office fund in Wales, because for many disabled people there are additional costs faced as a candidate if you're standing in an election that non-disabled people, you know, wouldn't have. You know, the need for meetings, you know, to have communication support in meetings, the need for assistance if you're going out door to door canvassing for, you know, for votes. We were able to support about 13 candidates, of which 6 candidates got elected. So, and I think that's really important, you know, to democracy, that disabled people, amongst others, are represented. So it has to be said, it is an incredibly challenging time, you know, for disabled people as individuals, but also for, you know, disabled people's organisations, you know, particularly those, you know, running at, you know, grassroots level. You know, we've had over 10 years of austerity, cuts to benefits and services. You know, we've had the last 2 years of living under lockdown as a result of the pandemic, which, you know, has had a real impact on people's lives. And now we've got the cost of living crisis, you know, rising prices, rising energy prices, which is going to really affect disabled people who, you know, have already had so many cutbacks in their income, and, you know, this is just like the triple whammy, really. Thinking back across, you know, DW's 50-year history, you know, because we, you know, from the 70s there was no legislation, there was no legal protection. You know, now we do have legislation, but, you know, the lives of disabled people seem to be as fragile as ever. You know, we may not be locked away in long stay institutions anymore, but, you know, the hard, you know, the the hardship, the breach of human rights that is going to be faced it is going to have equally restricting effects and devastating effects on people's lives and well-being.